Welcome back to Hints and Guesses, my podcast. This is Kent Dobson. Thanks for showing up again. Thanks for listening. Some of you have asked. My finger's doing much better. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, it's on the last podcast. Anyway, I appreciate the well-wishing. And so I'm back at it. This was a kind of a painful, slow process of recovering, and I'm like true old man status where cold weather seriously hurts my finger. I'm going to be like that guy who can tell the weather by consulting some missing body part. So anyway, you're going to love today's podcast. I'm talking to Brie Stoner, good friend. Kind of who she is and what she's doing in the world and bringing forth in the world will come out on the podcast. So I'm not going to give much of a bio. It kind of comes out naturally, but do check her stuff out. I'm really grateful to her for her friendship and the fact that she's such an inspiring person in my life, and I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad she said yes to coming on Hints and Guesses. So, special thanks to my Patreon supporters. As always, you make this podcast happen each month. Help me bring people on and produce it and make it and all the good stuff. And I just feel deeply, deeply grateful for your support and ongoing sort of encouragement. So, special thanks to my Patreon supporters. And I think I don't want to, I'll throw in two ads. One is I've got an Israel trip in March and it looks like it's going to work. It's not impossible for you to still get on it. You might have to book your own flights to Israel, but now Israel is open. There are lots of protocols related to COVID, but it looks like they're not insurmountable. And so I'm taking a group from Denver mainly, and a few people from other places in the world are also joining. So if that interests you and you have the capacity to do something like that in your life right now, you can contact me through my website, kentdobson.com. There's not much information about that specific Israel trip because I really just haven't, put it out there in the same way that I ordinarily do, but that is happening. And I'm working on a Lent descent class, which I do every year. And my schedule is a little insane in March, which is the season of Lent. But I'm just about ready to say here are the dates. And if that interests you, a few of you have said, "Hey, I'm interested in your Lent descent course." It's an online Zoom course where we talk about descent and allow ourselves to sink into the womb of the earth is really the most ancient image associated with this time period in this season that leads up to Easter. Anyway, if that interests you, the details will be on my website shortly, and you can contact me that way. And I don't want to waste any more time. I want to get right to the conversation. So I hope you enjoy. Hey, Brie.
Thank you, Sam. Hey, Kent.
Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's about time you invited me. I mean, I've been taking it personally, honestly.
Well, I've only had like 4 guests, so
Okay.
maybe 5. I was thinking we've known each other for like more than 20 years.
That's wild.
It is kind of wild. Like you probably know more about like the inside scoop of my life than just about anybody.
So does that give me permission?
Wife.
Does that give me permission to use that against you on this podcast?
Well, it goes both ways, I guess. So.
It's true.
Yeah. I was, we first met in the worship team days. Remember that? The playing music together.
Yeah.
I first heard your voice on an answering machine. And maybe you're even too young to know what an answering machine is. Did you ever have an answering machine?
Yeah, Kent, I was alive when I left you that message. So yes, I remember. I remember what the answering machine was.
It doesn't mean you were using a a
Oh
phone
yeah.
that had one or
I
something.
was I was also conscious
Yeah.
before computers,
All right.
so we have that in common.
Yes, we have that in common. It's a great gift, actually.
I think so.
So I'm going to make an intro, but before this part of the podcast, but it's a bit hard to describe what you do, what you're up to, and who you are. I mean,
Mm.
and maybe we have that in common. Sometimes I hear my kids complaining they don't know what to tell people about me
Yeah.
or you or Mandy. What do your parents do? But I mean, you make music, you paint, you have a podcast, you write, you're a teacher. What I mean, is there something else that I'm missing in those kinds of roles, if that's the right word for it?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we could add mother, lover, human to that mix. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough to know how to describe what it is that we do, Kent, because we're exploring multivocality. And I think so many people are comfortable and have been trained to be comfortable with the single identifier of
Yeah.
one job, one career. So I think that the term I'm most comfortable with, or the one that I think kind of encapsulates all of them, is artist
Mm.
or creative, because it allows room for multivocality of like different mediums and expressions. But if I had to pick one, that's the one that I feel like gives me the most space and the most freedom and doesn't pigeonhole me, into being, just one thing over the others.
Mhm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I resonate with that. When I was like 10, I said to myself, I'm going to be an artist. And I don't really have any idea what I meant. It's not like it was I didn't know
You
any artists.
you weren't talking about Eddie Vedder at that moment?
I was too young. I was too
Oh,
young
okay, okay.
to meet my muse, Eddie Vedder. Um, yeah, no, I said it kind of innocently. And I mean, I did go to the woods and draw things, but I didn't know, I didn't mean it as a career because I didn't know it was a career, and it's not a career really. Yeah, I connect with that. So it's almost, and vocality is an interesting way of putting it, because sometimes I'm asking without asking, um, what if my soul, if that's the right word for it, is shaped in a certain way, how does it want to come forth, or what avenue or what voice or what um, channel does it want to take? What course does it want to take to find its way into the world? And that's tricky and a little scary, and also like enlivening sort of at the same time.
Right.
Um, yeah. So I wanted to ask you about the early Brie, the early years. It sounds like an album. That's how we should think about your life. It's a series of albums, and
The first album was total shit, but yeah, let's go there.
yeah. Let's talk about the early years. Yeah, where were you born?
So I was born in Crown Point, Indiana. This is a very glamorous
Mm,
stage of my life, the very beginning. But it was about 8 months after I was born that my family and I moved to Spain. So we first lived in Saragossa, Spain for 5 years, and then we moved to Madrid, where I spent the rest of my childhood. But my parents were missionaries, so obviously they were in the business of saving the Catholics from hell.
mm,
Um, a job that we were very successful at.
mm.
So all of Spain is now redeemed
Yeah,
because of
that's also
us.
the
Yeah.
Pope's job. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, we
you're
edged him
sharing
out.
duties. Yeah,
Yeah, no, we edged him out. Healthy
yeah.
competition. But yeah, no, they were part of a conservative Baptist mission.
Mm,
But even though the mission itself was very conservative, they were kind of the rule breakers. They kind of came in with progressive ideas. Like my dad wanted to really invest in the community, and my parents insisted on my brother and I going to Spanish public school and really immersion in the culture itself. And my dad and my mom started a youth center. There's a huge drug problem in the 80s. And so they wanted to start a youth center to help kids be off the streets. And then my dad also was a part of doing basketball tournaments and sports and just activities and organizing community activities. So he worked with the Spanish government. So, even though the theology, the teaching, the worldview that I was being handed was pretty narrow and pretty constricted, uh, they themselves were already living something more expansive, even if they didn't even realize it. What they handed my brother and I was something far more inclusive and oriented toward just service and support and community.
Yeah. Yeah. That seems true. I mean, when I met your parents 20 years ago, whenever, I mean, they had that kind of vibe before a word like inclusion was popular and,
Yeah,
and
right.
came to mean all kinds of other things. They were
Right.
very inclusive people, very loving people and present, you know. Yeah. I mean, so, I mean, the way you're telling the story is quite gracious, and I don't want to talk you into a darker version, but did it take you a while to look at your conservative past and the constrictions of it um, with such sort of gratitude? I mean, how did you get there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think uh, we become aware of dissonance pretty early on. I mean, keeping with the theme of vocality or music, it's easy for me to draw on musical metaphors, but we become aware of certain rubs, harmonic tensions between what we're being taught and the inner language of the heart, or maybe what our soul's kind of into it. And I remember really early on, I think I was maybe 5, the first time that I stormed into my dad's office and, full of chutzpah and intensity, as you might well guess I had at age 5, and just looked at him and said, "How come I can't be a preacher or a pastor?"
Hmm.
And I remember him kind of like hemming and hawing and trying to work his way into describing, according to the very, strict confines of the religious worldview that we were in, women couldn't be pastors. They couldn't be teachers. And so he was trying to find his way into it. I think he quoted Paul or something. And I remember I nodded and I was like, okay. And I remember I turned around and walked away. But inside, it was the first moment of rebellion
Hmm.
that I can remember, because I was like, nope. I
Hmm.
just, it was the, I just, something in me pushed against it.
Hmm.
And there were other moments as well, moments when I would be enraptured by some aspect of the beauty of Spanish culture or Catholicism. I remember there was a processional that would take place that would kind of wind its way through the town. It was one of the many, saint days, whatever. They parading around the Virgin Mary, and all the women have these beautiful lace, shawls and coverings on their head. And there's this, raggedy little band that's playing. It's like kind of like Godfather, like just like,
Hmm.
like it's like just like really just out of tune. And but there was something about the pageantry, the ritual, the artistry, the beauty of the lace, the candles, the statue, the music. And I would just sit there looking out of my window and I just would love it. I loved everything it stood for. And I remember my mom, kind of walking up to me and, standing behind me in one of those times when I was looking out the window. And she said something like, "Oh, it's just so sad. It's so sad." And
Hmm.
what she
Hmm.
meant by that was like, oh, they're worshiping the wrong thing. And I mean, of course, now she's probably going to be pissed that I'm talking about this, right? Because she doesn't believe the same things anymore. But at the time, it was another moment of inner rebellion. So there was this rub that was taking place in that early map, in that early experience of my childhood. And the other thing that was happening during that time is my parents, whether they knew it or not, were passionate about art. And so they prioritized the arts. They took us to lots of museums and to lots of studios of the great impressionists, and found a way to afford me being in ballet, and managed to pay somehow an art teacher to teach us how to paint. And they also really emphasized literature. So we grew up reading a lot. So whether they realized it or not, they handed my brother and I a trap door into a more expansive worldview, into something that was more inclusive. So, yeah, to answer your question, it's like a long way to answer it. I think that the ability to hold the tension of those rubs had been growing in me for a long time, but I don't think it was until, you know, later on in my teenage years that I could look back on it and be like, oh, it's okay. It's okay that that was the worldview that I was given. And it's okay that it was out of tune with what I wasn't, intuiting. It's okay that, we were basically trying to save the Catholics from hell.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Mm-hmm.
welcome.
Mm-hmm.
I think the tolerance, the ability to hold that kind of paradox, it is it's like learning how to hear harmony. It's like two notes can exist at the same time and they don't have to flatten each other. It's okay.
Yeah. 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 Speaking of harmony, is it true that Mandy kind of
Yeah.
it's hard
Yeah.
to say
Mandy,
taught you harmony because it's something that you hear, but what would you say about that?
no, Mandy did.
Yeah.
Totally. I remember, and this is shortly after we met in the Mars Hill days and, being part of the worship team. I totally remember, by the way, the message that I left you because
Mm-hmm.
if for no other reason, because you and Mandy made fun of me for so long
I'm
afterward.
sorry.
It's
Yeah.
worth it. But I think was I 15 or 16? I was,
Probably. Yeah.
yeah. And I left a message. I was like, hi, my name is Brie Stoner, and I heard that you're auditioning singers for the worship band. So
That's about it. That's
that
it.
was
Yeah.
it. That was it. Yeah. So I knew how to sing, or I was learning how to sing. I was learning how to become comfortable with my own voice. I could play guitar, but I couldn't harmonize. And
Mm,
so I remember Mandy during our worship team's practices, she would stand behind me and
mm.
she would sing the harmonies. And then after a while, it was like my ears learned how to hear the notes that weren't there or hear the notes that could be there.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. So awesome.
yeah,
She's
it
so
is
good at
so
harmony.
awesome.
Oh,
So good.
yeah. And thanks for being on the worship team. I mean, I was like, compared to everyone else, I was like just a punk rocker and everyone else had some musical talent. So you and Mandy and others made it palatable.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, do you feel more Spanish or more American or somewhere in between or like the
Yeah.
geography of your own soul? Does it land somewhere?
Yeah. That's a really great question. And I think, speaking of harmony, we came back to the States when I was 12, which is such a tender time to go through
Mm,
a transition, let alone a massive cultural shock transition. We moved back to Indiana for a few years while my dad finished up his doctorate. And so, yeah, it was like going from Madrid to Valparaiso, Indiana. I can't imagine what would go wrong in that scenario
yeah.
or why that would be difficult. Yeah, so the question of where of home and kind of identifying with a particular landscape in terms of belonging, I think it has been a journey of learning how to hold both things at one time, both landscapes is true. Um, for a long time, I think it was natural for me to feel more Spanish than American because that was my childhood. Spanish was my first language, and English kind of came in a Spanglish mess later. Um, but all of my formative years were in a completely different culture. And when we came to the States, I felt like I had to just tuck that away and hide it because I don't have an accent. Most people just assume that I grew up in the States like everybody else. And so I learned how to tuck that away and hide it and almost like suppress it. Uh, and I don't think it was until, my 20s and 30s that I really began feeling more comfortable identifying as both. And,
Hmm.
there's a phenomenon called third culture kids
Yeah, yeah.
where, yeah, children of missionaries or the military wind up having this experience of feeling like they don't belong in either country, neither the one that they were born in or the one that they grew up in, but they also belong in both. And so there's like a third belonging that gets developed that
Mm.
is kind of both and.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this, like, I'm not going to get it right. But there's this quotation, like Tertullian or something like that, early Christian world. And it's like, he's speaking of the Christians, and it's like they're at, they're not at home. I'm going to paraphrase. It's like they're not at home anywhere, and everywhere is their home,
Yeah.
and every land is their fatherland. And that's like a weird kind of displacement, a sort of a spiritual, but also like physical and geographical sort of displacement. And maybe it does have a kind of third sort of belonging that's associated with it. It's funny you mentioned that, because when I lived in Israel, I was around a lot of people like this,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of immigrants. One of my best friends is born in Sweden, so that's his native language, but then he moved to Israel when he was about your age, and when you move to Israel, you're like in these, you're just fully immersed in Hebrew. And so he speaks Hebrew, but his dad is American and he speaks English. But if you meet him, you wouldn't know. You'd think he was an American, but he's got the same thing that I think you're trying to describe, which is kind of a certain amount of suffering comes with that. And also, it's kind of beautiful at the same time. So
Yeah, it's kind of like, if you think about it, it's like, you play one note and then you play the other note and you're kind of bouncing back and forth between them until you discover they can both kind of happen at the same time.
yeah.
That kind of complexity, it takes a while to
And
find that place.
we're in a one note culture. I mean,
Oh
everything is
yeah.
like that. You
Oh
got to know
yeah.
your Enneagram number and your Myers-Briggs, and
Yeah.
you got to identify somewhere on something as some letter or number or abstraction or category or ideology. I mean, it's just like it's a cultural disease right now.
Or even
Um,
just like what you were saying at the beginning, Kent, about like, what do you say you do exactly? And it's because we're obsessed with certainty,
mm,
or the idea of certainty being possible, as though certainty provides us with a sense of security. But as we recognize how much we live in an evolving, shifting, fluid reality, permeable reality, those categories don't work. But it
yeah.
makes sense why we like them, because it makes us think for a second that it does.
Well, the ego likes them. Yeah. It's like tasty to the ego. Yeah. Um, okay. Quick advertising break. What does this have to do with your new podcast? And what's it called?
I was like, oh, you're like sponsored by
No,
like
no, no,
Madcap Coffee or something. Like, what are
no.
we? I was so excited to hear what this was going to be. Yeah. So my podcast is called Unknowing, and I think for all the reasons we've already circled around, that there was something in me that was drawn to the gate of unknowing as being necessary for creativity, for spiritual growth, for love, for hope, for all of the most beautiful things in this life. It's like we have to walk through the gate of letting go of what it is that we think we know, to make room for what is infinitely possible, the infinite yet, or the infinite could be.
Yeah.
And that's a trust fall in every
Yeah.
way. And I think I experienced it over the years as an artist.
Mm.
And then I also experienced it in many ways in my own growth and spiritual transformation over the years, and experienced it in love. And so it just felt pretty key to kind of shift it from a problem, not knowing, to
Mm.
see it as a gift, like, oh, that's a good thing. You're in an unknowing moment. That means you're about to give birth to something.
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of terrain are you trying to explore just in the podcast? Like, who are you talking to? Why are you talking to them? What are what questions are surfacing aside from the obvious ones that you just mentioned,
Yeah.
which is the kind of the essence of the dance?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, before being on Unknowing, I was a part of a podcast called Another Name for Everything with Father Richard Rohr. He's an author, Catholic author, Franciscan author, and a lot of people have found his work helpful and meaningful because he talks so much about
Yeah.
paradox and
Like
things
me,
that
I
are.
found it helpful.
Yeah. Oh yeah, me too. Um, but even while I was on that podcast, I had the experience of really wanting to undress what can often be portrayed in a very precious way. You
Mm.
know, the contemplative or mystical world, whether it's in Christianity or other traditions, can sometimes just feel like you have to be wearing like hemp and like speaking in a very like soft
And
voice
have
and
a
like
sheet over your head. Yeah.
yeah, like just it's like a little, too fucking precious. Like, it's just like it's a
Yeah.
little too, and it's a little too aloof, and a little. It can sometimes be too aloof. It can sometimes be so wrapped up in these blueprints, these beautiful esoteric blueprints that the mystics have written, and people don't realize that what we're doing when we do that is we're pedestalizing the teacher, we're pedestalizing these mystics, we're
Mhm.
pretending as if they weren't humans, as if they weren't messy and confused and frustrated just as we are. And so I knew pretty early on that I wanted this podcast to not be precious,
Mm.
that I wanted to have conversations about spirituality that, removed everything that was sort of uh, keeping it in the realm of religiosity
Mm.
and
Which
focused
means
on,
what? Which means what to you?
hmm,
Religiosity means.
I think, uh, that's a great question. I think religiosity is another landscape of belonging. And it's
Mm.
use, being a part of a religious, you know, let's call it country. It's like you learn a lot. You learn a lot from the culture of that country. But ultimately, I find that it's too easy to camp out in that world and forget about the world we're in, the one that's fleshy and confusing and is in danger, that the one that's burning, the one that needs our care and our
Mm.
attention. And
Mm. Mm.
so after, going to so many retreat centers where it's like just, the most bucolic settings and just the sweetest, softest voices and just the most meaningful meditation sessions. It's like, I want to talk about how you find God, in sex. How do you find God in the midst of unraveling one career as you have the courage of stepping into another?
Yeah.
So for me, I have found the the vernacular of creativity is so useful in that regard, because you want to talk about ideas like love, compassion, and love, and
Mm.
everybody talks about love, and it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Are you just talking about being nice? Are you just talking about being kind? But for me, love is creativity, because if your love doesn't manifest something new in the world, something that serves the whole in some shape, way, or form,
Mm.
then it's not love.
Mm.
If your love doesn't show up in animating your courage to step out of your comfort zone and to create and to trust fall into the what could be, then it's not love. It's just comfort and safety.
Mm. Yeah.
It's, hey,
Yeah. Yeah. That's like Eros, it's like it's this living vitality, this
right.
underground living vitality that erupts
Yeah.
and seems to be aimed in a certain direction. I mean, not aimed like um, in a in a in a highly specific one, but toward more,
Toward
toward
moreness,
yeah,
the
yeah.
moreness. And to that end, I think I really wanted to have conversations with artists
Mm.
first and foremost, and to help people see themselves as artists. A lot of people have this idea that if you're not making music or painting, that you're not an artist. But if you're living, if you're alive, you are creating something with every breath, with every choice, with every action. And so I'm trying to help people remember or become membered to their own artistry, to see themselves as creative. So I love
Mm-hmm.
talking to artists. And then, of course, there are, spiritual teachers that come on, or authors, but also, social change agents and like mischief makers, people who
Yeah,
are courageously falling into the more that you were just speaking of.
yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but the muses, and so in Greek mythology, you have the nine muses. Some of them poetry, dance, art, and all nine. But what's amazing is that they're birthed from the mother of memory. They're that to be creative, at least I'm as I understand it through Greek mythology and as I even experience this, is to remember. It's to remember something. It's to remember and and to have something come through, something be born. And you know, I bristle a little bit, if I'm just honest, when I hear you say everyone is an artist, because not because I don't believe you. I do. Like, we have that capacity to be taken by the muse. Everyone does. Everyone can remember in the way that you're saying. And it is an ultimate calling to live your life as an artist in the world. I only bristle because Americans here, career. It's like
Yeah.
my buddy the other day posted this thing and is like, first spiritual experience. And it was like this person looking up at this butterfly. And their question was, is this a career? So it's like, that's
I
the,
think I remember Kent. I think I was 17 or 18. I forget. But there was one time where I remember there was some like worship team event or something. I think it had something to do with Scott Baker.
yeah.
I remember a conversation in which you said to me, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, that you said to me, don't become a musician because you think it can be a career. Like, this is not a career. Become a musician because it makes you into a certain kind of person, a person who is sensitive, who pays attention, who's tuned in to the more subtle realm. And that stayed with me, but you're right. We have a way in our, Western culture, especially here in the States, of, yeah, wanting to create an identity out of anything, but especially career wise. It's like, what do you do? The fact that that's our first question
Mm-hmm.
is just so weird.
Yeah. And there's like almost no way to get out of it. Even if I'm an asshole and I say
Yeah.
something like, I just am, I just sound
Yeah.
like an idiot to myself,
Right.
so.
Right. Yeah. You have to accept that one. But I do think, you know, understanding ourselves as artists, as creatives, is it is could potentially offer an avenue in which you can see the possibility of your own life.
Mm.
And it creates a framework in which you are not passive. You're not waiting for things to happen to you. You're not passive even in your relationship to the divine. If you believe in a monotheistic God, you're not sitting back and being like, oh, God is inviting me to do this, or I'm doing that. It's like, no, God fucking wants you to create. Like,
Mm.
if that's the energy of the divine, which it seems to be. I mean, what do I know? But if so much of human intuition around whatever we can call the mystery of what is more than human seems to orient around making, all the creation stories,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like all of the archetypes,
Mm-hmm.
all of the myths, then why do we not live with that same kind of agency? Why do we not see ourselves as capable of manifesting what is next? And
Yeah.
it's like I take issue with this because I think in a lot of my experience, even in studying theology or even in mysticism, it's like we get so kind of precious or caught up in the voices of those who came before us. And
Mm.
there is a natural reverence that I think we ought to have toward all great art, whether it's the prophetic kind or the artistic kind, and the appreciation of what is possible when
Mm-hmm.
somebody is fully alive or really tuned into origin or to source. But it's like, when are we going to stop
Yeah.
worshiping those who have come before us, whether
Yeah. Yeah.
they
Yeah.
were the prophets or, like, when are we going to wake up and realize, like, you have everything that they had?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what are you going to do?
Not to blame Thomas Aquinas for everything, but I think, I think
Let's
we,
please.
I think we misunderstand the Imitatio Christi, or the imitation of Christ, however you say it in
Yeah.
Latin, because we take it to mean sort of like what was going on in the 90s, like what would Jesus do kind of thing. And um, instead of, I mean, if we were to do what Jesus did, which would be something like this: develop a wildly, not even develop, but submit to a wildly unique experience of the divine that is personal, and live courageously in the world as an artist. And
Yeah.
only we can do that. Like, Jesus can't do it for us. And in some ways, the ancient voices are whispering the same thing in our ear. I just thought about Thomas Merton, who I am still in love with, and has helped shape my own way of seeing the world. But he has this one great line. He's like, what I wear is pants and how I pray is breathe, and it's
Mm.
like, well, I need to do it like Thomas Merton and what, move to Kentucky? No, I mean, I need to find my own pants and learn how to breathe, in my
Yeah.
own way. So,
There's an audacity to that though, Kent, that's like this is why I think courage is so critical, and talking about courage and talking about unknowing as having courage, because we're so stuck by the imitation of what others have done, we don't realize that we have to unknow that in order
yeah.
to know what we ourselves can do. And if,
Mhm.
to your point about imitating Christ, it's like, if people aren't getting in your face and saying, who the hell do you think you are? Then you're not doing it right. You're not really
Yeah.
imitating Christ. Like, that should be like a foundational question. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
is somebody getting pissed off about the audacity and the courage of your creativity?
Mhm.
That's a good sign.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, that's what happened to Jesus.
Exactly.
Um, yeah. I want to try to fill in the gap between your most recent vocalizations and harmonizing in the world and the early years. So, what happened um, after high school? I mean, did you go to college? What happened? Where? Did you take that? Did you take the right path? I mean, if you could just
Yeah.
tell us the right path, we could be just
We
like
could all
you.
do
Yeah.
it. Oh, I have been in the process of getting good and lost and loving it. So I think the beginning of the second stage of my life, right after high school, was when I started to embrace being lost. I remember talking to you and Mandy. There had been a teaching that Rob Bell had done at the church that we were part of, and he had talked about prophets, and he said something along the lines of, the reason there aren't more prophets in this world is because we're too busy planning out our lives perfectly. There's no room for God. There's no room for mystery, because we're like, okay, well, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to meet the right person. I'm going to get my master's degree. Then we're going to get married. I'm going to have 2 kids and a dog. And then we're going to have a house. Then we're going to save for retirement. Then, like, maybe when we retire, like, maybe then I'll have space to like embrace the adventure of the unknown, or
Mhm.
also known as God's realm. So I remember hearing that teaching, and I think I was a senior at 16, so I must have been 16. So like I just remember like feeling like a lightning bolt had gone through me, and all of my plans and like where I was headed to go to school and what I was going to study in college, like it just became meaningless,
Mhm.
because I couldn't shake the question of what if I gave God that much reign over my life? Like, what if I embraced unknowing that much, to like literally walk away from the path that had been set before me as like a societal norm? Like,
Mhm.
and I told my parents about it. They were pretty supportive, which is really surprising. I mean, there was like a little bit of, concern. And at the time, I think we set it up as like, oh, it's just going to be a year. And I
15 years
remember,
later.
yeah, right. I remember you and Mandy being like really concerned. You guys were like, no, you're like, college is where you find yourself. You have to go to college. So instead
It's
of,
funny. We're telling you to conform. Be a
yeah,
conformist. Go to college. Take unnecessary classes. Go
be in
go
debt.
$80,000 in debt. Exactly. Trust me, it's really worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think what you perceived and what many of my high school teachers perceived, and my parents and others, was, I had a very curious mind
Mm.
and loved, academia. I loved learning. I was quite good at it. I was in, the the upper percentage of my class, and so,
Mhm.
but there was an attachment there too. Like, I liked feeling smart. I liked everybody knowing I was smart, and so there was an awareness even at 16 that like I was giving something up.
Mm.
Um, it's interesting now, and I'm sure we'll get to this eventually, but I've been studying the story of Inanna, the goddess Inanna.
Mm.
And as she descends into the underworld, she has to go through 7 gates. And at each gate, there's an exchange where, the judge of each gate asks her to give something up. And
Yeah.
so,
Like
you know,
what?
oh, her crown was the first
Okay.
one.
Yes.
Lapis earrings and a
Mm.
necklace was another one, which is kind of interesting, the ears and the throat.
Mm.
Um, she had to give up her measuring rod and rope.
Hmm.
that was a symbol of royalty, which I find fascinating, her golden ring, and eventually her vestments. So she was completely naked by the
Hmm.
time she got in.
Hmm.
So I would say that was a gate. I gave up that kind of the certainty of an academic path and of, social, uh, like to be a card carrying like college graduate.
Hmm.
And instead, I started working at Mars Hill, working part time for the youth ministry, but also for music and working with you and Chad. And I voraciously devoured any and all books that you handed my way and Rob handed my way. And I think I begged each of you to just like, I think in my terror that I was missing out on like core foundational education, I made you each give me like some books and things. And I think in hindsight, I was probably exposed to a better education just in that first year than most freshmen are.
Probably. I was probably just mainly recommending Heschel and Jewish
Yeah.
stuff at the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was. It was a lot of Heschel, but it was also poetry. And Chad gave me lots of books on philosophy. And then,
Mm.
of course, I was digging into theology as well. So those early years were, the formation that was taking place was, like a philosophical like shift worldview. A lot of the same things that happened for people during college was happening for me. It's a tremendous amount of growth and opening, a blooming,
Mhm.
and I was also, recording music and kind of discovering my capacity as an artist and songwriter. And uh, eventually, I think it was 3 years after that, and this is very typical. You get to a certain place where that particular container doesn't fit, and you hit another set of inner frustration and sort of dissonance with the world that you're in. So I became uncomfortable in that, even in what seemed like the most inclusive and cool spiritual container that was at that time. So that kind of broke out. I broke out of that. It was like an egg that shattered, and continued my musical career after that. Eventually moved to Los Angeles, lived in LA for about a year before moving back to Michigan. And um, my musical career has always been unfolding. And yeah, I probably shouldn't say the word career after we just like, you know,
We'll give you a
said
pass. It's fine. Yeah.
it. Yeah, it's like, it's not really a career, but it's like my musical, how should we say this? My musical growth, I guess, my musical capacity, abilities had been unfolding all along. So from being a songwriter to performing in LA, being a part of a community out there where we were playing shows 4 to 5 nights out of the week. And that really was just incredibly formational, the skill set that came out of that time.
Mhm.
Um, but then as I got married and sort of started turning toward wanting to create a family with my then husband, music was something that I did on the side, and I became a vocalist and a producer and did a lot of instrumental music, but also music for TV and film as a singer, as an artist. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that covers the ground of like the middle territory, but
Mhm. Well, I
it,
like what you said. Actually, it reminded me of something that I got from James Hollis, the Jungian. He said it's something like this: that yesterday's insight is now today's block.
mm,
And he wrote this, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, um, at 81 years old, you know?
damn,
I just think there's something profound in that. Okay, yeah, Marcel was like this kind of really interesting place, and then all of a sudden it was a block. And then
yeah,
same with LA. I mean, what a kind of initiation
right.
into songwriting, into being a musician, and to living in that crazy, insane place. And then it was a block, you know?
It was. I
Yeah.
remember when I left LA, I was just so tired. And I felt like I was Wendy lady surrounded by lost boys. I was like
Mm.
24 at the time, but all of my friends were 35 and 40-year-old men who were literally like
Peter
acting like
Pan.
children.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were
Yeah.
they were the lost boys. So I felt
Yeah.
like, I was like, where are the fucking accountants in the
Mm.
city? Like, who has to get up at 8? Like, does anybody have
Mm.
like any kind of like rhythm of life? And oh, oops. I think I was really hungry for seasonality. I was hungry for um yeah, something like a different kind of container.
Mm.
So, naturally I decided to get married.
Yeah, as you would. Yeah, that there's a container. My life is out of
Right.
control. I know, marriage.
But yeah,
It
there
does actually
was,
function like that. It's
it
like,
does.
okay, you settle down now, and
Yeah,
here are the rules, roughly speaking.
right. Well,
And
and in hindsight, I think I had broken such a major social rule, social norm, uh, that, by not going to college, that there was a sense of like, yeah, like I better at least get this one right. I
mm,
better do what's expected of me in this regard. And
what kind
but
of voice is that? I mean, how would you say that now? Um,
yeah, I think it's part of that early map that we're handed.
mm,
You know, this is one of the things I talk about on my podcast is with every guest, I say, well, what was the map that you were handed growing up? Because
mm.
the map we're handed in many ways gives us a certain sense of these landmarks of whether or not we're living the good life.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
but really, it's not the good life. It's the should life. And that's not the fucking good life. So
Mm,
I think I was following the voices of the map that said this is what you should do.
mhm.
And yeah, there was a lot of good girl training that I had received that I was still pretty unconscious of at that time that were driving the agenda of you must get married, you must have kids. You better fulfill your value as a woman because if you don't do those things, like what are you?
Yeah, seriously. And it's interesting that when I was describing um, some of the voices in your life at the beginning, you said, and I'm also a mother. I was like, oh, interesting. Wonder why I left that off. Was a little curious question I had. So, well, let's talk about it now. So, what about motherhood? And maybe I want to ask it this way: what part of motherhood was like another initiation, and
Oh,
an initiation into what? And what would you say? What would you say about that?
wow. Yeah. I think becoming a mother has been the holiest passage, uh, precisely because if, describing Inanna's descent, it's like motherhood is so holy because it asks for everything
Hmm.
from you. Um, yeah, I remember being pregnant with Soren, my firstborn, just sort of like the initial terror and wonder in equal parts of being out of control already being
Hmm.
pregnant. It's like this was my body. Now this is not my body. Like I thought I had a sense of what I wanted to eat, but apparently I'm being hijacked by the alien inside me and I have to eat like, peanut butter like a ravenous beast. So early on, as women, those of us who become biological mothers have an initiation into being out of control, into your life is no longer about your wants. Uh, it is about somebody else's needs for survival, and it's quite primal. And I really loved it, especially at the beginning, even though it was so wildly like a different country where all the rules like went out the window in the sense that it is so primal what takes over the instinct to protect, the instinct to nurture. But early on with Soren, I was just very enraptured by the rhythm of life giving, of just being in this cycle with my firstborn. And then I think it was probably when Rowan came along, my secondborn, that was like, oh, now we're really fucked because it's like the loss of control becomes so real and just like being completely overwhelmed. And
Mhm.
there's nothing quite like having a toddler and a newborn at the same time. And also being a creative who's like particularly sensitive to sound. like that really sucked. And I'd never been needed that much
Mm,
before, ever,
mm,
ever. And I've learned, since and just like learned about things like attachment styles and discovered that My early training and attachment was like, I prefer being my own island. Like I prefer the avoidant reality of like not being needed. So yeah, it was a holy baptism. But also full of wonder and full of magic and a slowing down of presence, for all the meditation that I've been a part of, learned to do, practiced, those moments of breastfeeding my babies, of being like fully present in my body. Like I have memories of staring down at Rowan's face and literally being able to see the tiny little translucent hairs off his skin and just being completely awestruck by how beautiful he was, is by the wonder of life. Yeah, it's a presencing that has stayed with me. It's a way of seeing magic, of perceiving magic, um, that only comes through that gateway of attention. But my kids continue to be a portal of presence and wonder and awe all the time. Just sometimes just like little things, like the sound of one of my kids' laughter. It's like, I swear to you, like if if I had to describe it in a way that could like poetically capture how it feels in my body, I would say it's like all of the angels in heaven stopped what they're doing just so they could listen to that sound.
Ah,
It's like it's
yeah.
that beautiful.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm really moved by what you're saying here. Just makes me tear up. It's like, God, like just life itself, just surrendering to life as it is, our humanness, our innate, primal, instinctual, terrible, and wonderful humanness is all the initiation we need, I mean,
Oh yeah.
um, yeah, there's something very unique and beautiful in the way you're describing the journey of being a mother that, is out of reach for me. It's like, no wonder, no wonder ancient cultures, they focus so much attention on masculine initiation rites, because we don't have that. We don't have, our life is not taken from us in the same way.
Mm.
Um, unless we're forced to go off to battle, I mean, that's the, there's
No,
that.
it is. And
Yeah.
I want to say something about the beauty of it, which is that it's terrible,
Mm.
and terrible in like the true definition of like the English word, that it's like it is a great thing. It
Yeah.
is a
It's
great
yeah.
costly thing, and it's
Mhm.
not easy, and
Mhm.
it only requires everything, every part of you. But even now that my marriage has changed shape and the reality of how I parent has changed, there's a great cost in having to go without them, in the co-parenting arrangement that I have with my ex-husband. There's a that is also a gate, because even now I'm practicing the same things that I practice, the first time you see your kid hurt, or listening to your child cry when they're learning how to put themselves to sleep. It's the gate of letting go. And there's something about that great presence that life initiates us into through life itself that somehow seems to teach us that, like, without the awareness of how transient and fragile and how not ours any of this is, we can't appreciate the beauty of it either. So they go together, like this awareness that they're mine and they're not mine at all. And
Okay. Yeah.
that's that edge of, the longing is the love, the pain is the love, the heartbreak is the love. That's a practice and another gate that I feel like my kids have initiated me
Mm.
into.
Yeah. I definitely know that feeling of, this is my kid and not my kid.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking. It's like, um, and it's heartbreaking in that kind of exquisite, um, lovely and terrible, to use your word, way. It's, yeah. I kind of want to ask you a little bit about the end of your marriage, not like in the we could have like, let's talk about our exes and play some Taylor Swift in the background or something. That's not what I mean. And why do I want to ask you about that? Well, because you said it's a passage, and
It
it's like the
was.
myth, and something else is taken, some other adornment is taken. And I just, when I look out at the landscape, just of my friends, my close friends, it's
Mhm.
like the ending of long-term relationships is now the new norm. And
Mm.
there's all kinds of technical advice and how to's, and we know how to do it. We know how to end a marriage, technically speaking, but the
Mm.
spiritual terrain that opens up is pretty unfamiliar to people. And maybe it's because we're not used to spiritual training, period. That could be the case. But
Mm.
maybe, I mean, what would you say about that? What kind of adornment was taken off in this gate, and what was the terrain like?
Mm.
If you want to say, I don't want to,
Yeah,
force you.
yeah. I think yeah, it might be fair to say that this would be like one of the latter gates, to compare it to Inanna's descent, the being stripped away of everything that
Mm,
you think makes you you, to be laid bare, to feel completely naked. And that's such a visceral image, isn't it? As human beings, like it's just a visceral image to be that vulnerable. Uh, but the story of my divorce, is wrapped up with an experience of trauma. I through a series of events experienced, an assault in which violence came crashing into my life. Um, the experience of losing control forcefully, of having my own will and volition being taken from me. That was a profound rift, like a lightning bolt that just tore through my sky
mm,
and through the sky of the marriage that I was in. But there had been many other issues that had been unfolding over time. I think, as many people have and did, I got married so young. And really, as we discussed, like listening to the should voices, and, loved my then husband very much, to the best of my ability, to the best that I knew how. But I didn't even know who I was. I had no sense of who I really was, or what I really needed, or, things like energy and compatibility, and where I would like to go. And, I've heard somebody say, I don't know if it's Dr. Solomon, but says like, everybody goes through different stages, or yeah, everybody goes through several marriages.
mm.
If you're lucky, it's to the same person.
Yeah, that's
you
true.
know it
Yeah.
is. And so sometimes things can work and sometimes they don't. Right around the time that I, in both processing my own trauma, I had kind of, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back, where I just realized I just couldn't I couldn't I couldn't continue to be in the marriage that I was in, given everything that was going on in my life.
Mm,
I remember right around that time there was a tree in the backyard of the house that I shared with my ex-husband that just like fell,
mm,
just like keeled over. I mean, this was like right in the middle of all this stuff happening,
mm.
just like toppled. Like it wasn't windy. It wasn't like it,
Yeah,
it just like died.
that's right. Yeah.
And I remember
Totally.
looking at the inside of the tree,
Mm,
and half of it had been rotted and
mm,
was rotting out, and the other half was alive. And that is how life goes sometimes, is like sometimes the tree topples, and it topples this way instead of that way. And things can be half alive and half living for a long time until one day they are just done. Um, and I think that was a decision I had to face in myself. And one of the aspects of that gate, the gate of divorce, was in breaking the should map. You know, I felt like I was failing everybody
yeah. Yeah.
by getting divorced. And I was so sure that my parents and my friends were just going to be so devastated and disappointed. And I'll never forget the conversation I had with my dad and my mom. And I just kind of said, look, I have to do this. It's either this or give up my soul. I have to do this.
God.
I don't know why I have to do this, but I have to do it. Please, forgive me.
Mm,
God forgive me, I have to do this.
mm.
And my dad was just sitting there and he just started crying and he just said, I'm so relieved.
What a
I'm so
surprise.
relieved. Yeah. And the shock of that to
Mhm.
be like, from my own dad to say, choose life,
Mm,
choose living. It doesn't matter whose expectations you are shattering, like choose the expansiveness of your soul. He said to me later that he felt like I had been hiding behind a heavy cloak for a long, long time.
mm.
And that in that moment, he got a glimmer of me again. And he was like, there you are.
Yeah.
There you
Yeah.
are. I see you again.
Ah,
So, yeah, it was a gate. It was devastating. And it was so painful because I cared so much for him, my ex
mhm.
husband. And because this wasn't wrapped in an easy target of hate or anger of like, oh, you cheated or this person did that. It
Right.
was just the end.
Mm,
um and learning how to navigate that with compassion and find a way to do it so that like our kids could still have an easy transition took a lot of conscious choice.
mm.
And we have the kind of relationship and friendship that we have now, which is a very collaborative co-parenting relationship because of millions of little choices that we made along the way to
And hard
choose
ones. Yeah.
hard ones, to choose
Yeah.
them more again and again, to be like, okay, this sucks and let's choose them more.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks for opening up. Um, I'm just really touched by the things that you're saying. Um, and that image of the tree is dark and kind of synchronistically wonderful. And I think many people know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. And sometimes
Mhm.
you don't even see that it's rotten until it falls over,
That's right.
until it reveals itself. Yeah. Um, mm, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about the mentors in your life and the like kind of the spiritual paths that you've been following. And what do I mean by mentors? I guess I mean it straight from the word from the Odyssey, where mentor, the character, comes down to the beach and tells Telemachus, you gotta leave, and I'm gonna go with you for a while. That's basically the essence of it. You gotta leave the island, otherwise you're gonna grow bitter and you know suicidal, and let's go. So what kind of like unforeseen, and that's part of the archetype of the mentor. It's not like you look them up on the internet necessarily, that you sort of bump into them. It's not like, who can I choose as my mentor? It's not like choosing a coach or something. They're not coaches. So what would you say, who are the mentors that have come into your life that have helped you grow in the way we've been using that word?
Yeah. It's funny the way you framed like, who can I choose as my mentor? It's like the same thing of like, what should I do for my career? It's like in the effort to try to like name the thing, it's like we miss the thing itself and like
Mm,
don't see who's right in front of us. So yeah, yeah, I think going back to to the beginning, I think you and Mandy played and still play a huge role as mentors in my life, as companions of the journey. Uh, and you haven't left me yet, you two. So
mm.
I guess that's a good thing. But I remember, the companionship of even just reading material or being exposed to teachings and discussing it, or
Yeah.
going through heartbreak and loss or confusion and discussing it. So that's a particular kind of mentorship, or those who are like your anam cara people, like your
Mm.
soul
So
people
people, yeah.
that
Mm.
just you're walking along life and you can, get busy and lose touch and reconnect a few months later, and then it's like, oh, you're reading that, me too, or like, oh my gosh, you're doing this, like tell me more, and
Mm.
you're inspired by each other, you animate each other to keep going. But I think I've had an embarrassment of riches in terms of mentors, both artistically and spiritually. And um, I think I'll focus on the spiritual ones, just because I think,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Rob Bell was a mentor early on, and the things that he was exploring and thinking and really influenced me and opened me up to a whole lot. But really, Richard Rohr became a mentor even before I ever met him because of the work that I was reading, that all his books that were giving me language for an experience I didn't know how to describe, giving language to the mystical experience or even just introducing me to the mystics. Um, and through Richard Rohr and kind of my work at the CAC, being exposed to people like Cynthia Bourgeot, who was also a mentor, who really invested a lot in me and who I really learned a lot from. And she had a unique kind of quirky as fuck blend of, an
That's an
Episcopalian
understatement.
Episcopalian, priest mixed with like Gurdjieff fourth way teachings, mixed with just her own mystical brand of, amazing creative explorations. But I think what really drew me to her work was her brilliance, her ability to articulate ideas in such a brilliant way, in such a profoundly precise way. And then other mentors, that were part of that CAC world, the Center for Action and Contemplation world, like James Finley and Brian McLaren, who's now a part of that world, but we knew from back in the
Yeah,
Mars Hill
back in the old
days.
days. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was kind of an ever-present voice.
Mm.
So these are a lot of the spiritual, mentors. But I want to say something about all of them, which is that with each of them, I had to get really disappointed. I
Yeah.
had to, I had to like sort of be remembered to their humanity. And with each of them to go through the process of discovering their humanity and to feel the disappointment was to birth my own capacity and to
Yeah.
believe in my own ability.
Yeah. That's in Zen Buddhism.
Yeah.
It's called slapping the master.
I was just going to
Yeah.
say that,
That's
yeah,
so
that,
good.
that James Finley teaches about that. He's like, you got to slap the master at some point. So,
And everybody listens to that and says, yeah, that's right. But not him.
right, right. We can't slap him. He's so precious. But yeah, no, I think one after the other in different ways, there has been that moment
Mhm.
and not without great pain. I'm not saying like it felt good and it's not to say that I thought I don't feel worthy or like somehow superior in any way to these great teachers. But I had to get to a place where I remembered my own agency,
Yeah.
my own ability to explore and express these things in my own voice, not in their voice, in my
Mhm.
own voice.
Yeah, that's no easy task. I mean, I feel like I'm 45 now and I'm having to face this question again. I've been working on a book, and as you know, like I'm full of quotations all the time. Like I just gave you one, like slapping the master, for example. And I have some natural ability to see patterns and to connect this with that. And so said this, and it's like this map, and it's kind of like this, and it's like this piece of artwork. And I can get lost in that kind of labyrinth. And I was 80,000 words into a book recently, and it's like a force stopped me.
Mm.
And there's this line in the New Testament. It says that the Spirit of Jesus stopped Paul from going to Macedonia. That always makes me laugh. And it was like that. And something else was like, all right, once again, you're going to have to say, if you're going to say anything else, it's got to come from a deeper place.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
that's like, God, it's like,
It's not easy.
no.
But see, this is where I feel like, the reason I wanted to name all those spiritual teachers is to say, as great as they were, they're not the primary mentors.
Mm.
I think the artists always will be the poets, the artists, Picasso, Matisse, you know, um,
Motherhood.
fucking motherhood. But yeah, like the full stop that many of us have had and experienced in the last 2 years because of the pandemic is a little bit of that Jesus, saying to Paul, like, nope.
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
total forced stop of
Mhm.
all of our plans, of everything that we have identified with, all of the things that we anticipated that we thought we were going to achieve, accomplish, or do.
Yeah.
And during that great pause, the voices that came to me were the poets. It was Rilke, it was Neruda, it was Mary Oliver, it was the artists. It was Matisse and Picasso, and uh, it was the fury of creativity. It was the rediscovery of that primary and primal capacity of being a creator
Mhm.
that allowed me to have grace for the slapping the master moments and be like, oh, it's okay, because nothing is ever lost or wasted in this life.
Mhm.
So it's not like I lost anything. In fact, it's just more of more. It's like loaves and fishes more. It's
Yeah.
like all of their teaching got woven in with the influence of artists and
Mhm.
put in a blender of my life, put on high, made a big fucking mess. But here we are. It's like it's
Yeah.
become something new. It's alchemy. It has been sublimated. It has been transmuted into something that is mine or uniquely in my voice.
Mm. God, yeah. Yeah. Um, mm. I don't want to end our conversation. It's fun because we haven't talked in a while. Like just
I know.
it's been like a few weeks or a few months really since we've had a really deep conversation. So it's like what we're doing now is what we'd be doing anyway if we were if we were
Totally.
talking. It's like let's do a podcast. What should we plan
Except
it? No, let's
we
not
we
plan.
probably wouldn't go so far into the past. We'd probably
Yeah,
just
that's right.
we
Totally
could
about your.
talk a
Although I
whole
learned a
hour
lot.
just on the
Yeah,
last 6 months.
exactly. I
Right.
did learn some things about the early years, about the early albums that I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
Um, but why don't you? I'd love to just hear a few things about what's going on right this second, and what kinds of things are you offering in the world that some of us might be interested in, and
Mm.
um, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think during the pandemic was when I started becoming remembered to my own music, and I wrote a lot of songs during that time, and a lot of songs about just longing and just sort of feeling into my own contours as a woman. Now that my kids are a bit older, it's like, oh yeah, I'm a woman, I'm not just a mom. Oh yeah, I'm a lover too, forgot about that.
Mm.
uh
Yeah.
so the return to music as one of my primary languages, it felt really good. And I started writing all these songs in English and in Spanish and in French. I
Hmm.
have no business speaking French, but I think because of
more
my
than
love,
more than I do. So
yeah, my love of a lot of artists there, and because we spent some time in France when I was a little girl, we used to travel there in the wintertime. And so it's like it's nostalgic. And there's a thing about languages, and it's true about terrains too. Like some flowers only bloom in certain places, and
yeah.
languages like that. Certain things can be said in one language that just can't quite be said in another. So I think to have written an entire album in this blend of three languages was a deep homecoming for me.
Mm.
And to write so freely and openly about, my sexuality, my spirituality, and all of it kind of harmonizing at the same time without needing to justify anything with depth
Yeah. Yeah.
or meaning. It's like, no, this is a song about missing my lover. Like, yeah, it's
Yeah,
just
but what does
about
it really
sex.
mean?
It's
Yeah.
about sex. But that was so liberating. It was so freeing to finally be in a place where I felt comfortable saying all of it
Mhm.
and saying it all in all those different languages, all the different languages of me. So I started making music. And during the pandemic, part of what happened is the organization I was working for dissolved suddenly. So I was in a quite intense forced stop of what the fuck do I do now?
Mm.
So I, was just embraced the unknowing. Luckily, I had a savings account that bought me time, but I just focused on music and I started painting again, which I hadn't done in a long time. And slowly but surely conceived of the podcast that we've spoken about called Unknowing. So this past year has been the largest, most costly, most terrifying leap of my life.
Mm.
Coming up in February, it'll be 1 year that I'm officially unemployed and not
Congratulations.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not belonging to the realm of like having a paycheck, the
Mm.
security of the paycheck. And there are many nights that, I'm terrified. And my mom could probably tell you the many, many nights that I call her at 3 a.m, being like, what the fuck am I doing?
She answers the phone.
She does, because she's always up in the
Wow.
middle of the night.
Yeah.
I know. We need to do our own I need to do a podcast just with Wendy. It would be pretty funny.
That would be
But
great.
she could probably also tell you that my voice has never sounded clear,
Mm,
that my eyes haven't sparkled this much, maybe ever, that I
mm,
haven't laughed as much as I'm laughing.
mm.
And I have never, ever felt more alive, ever. And so I trust it, even though, there's risks involved. And I'm becoming more used to the fact that I'm always perpetually 2 months away from being dead broke.
Yeah. Well,
But
we're all 2 months away from being dead anyway. So
but I think this time really inspired me to discover or weave the experience of being an artist and a creative with the spiritual growth and transformation. And so this winter, I launched what I hope will become a year-long journey of looking at the seasons as invitations to see your creativity as orbiting a creative cycle
mm,
and to kind of become remembered with a more cyclical understanding of life force and
mm,
eros and energy. Because we have this like panic that takes over every time we go through a winter, whether it's literal or figurative. It's like, wait, I'm not creating, I'm not producing, I don't know what I should do. It's like, oh, that's you're in womb time. It's okay.
yeah,
So I
the
launched a
hermetic
winter
season.
course.
Mhm.
Yeah, I launched a course, a 6-week course this winter called Womb. In the spring, there will be one called Woo. In the summer, there will be one called Bloom. And then in the fall, there will be a Wean. And
Oh, I love it.
yeah, it's nice because as I'm writing it for myself. Like
Hmm.
it's the spiritual path that like is not precious, oriented toward creativity, but it's weaving in everything that I've been exposed to and have learned along the way. So it's
Mm,
quite meaningful.
awesome. Yeah. Well, it's been a joy talking with you. Thank you. Thanks for being you. And I think displaying the kind of courage that you hope to inspire in other people, I mean, I can feel it even as we're speaking. So, um, yeah, thanks for coming on. And uh, I hope it gets under their skin a little bit, this
Mm.
podcast in the right kind of way. And, um, and they know how to find you online. Do you have a website?
I do. It's
Yeah.
briestoner.com, but I mean, come on, social
Yeah.
media, whatever.
I know. I
But
know.
Kent, thank you for having me on. And I just want to say that, you know, the animating force that you and Mandy have offered me in my journey has woven whatever it is that you see of courage and of beauty and of possibility now. And so we share that, it's
Mhm.
like I have been inspired by your journey again and again, your willingness to color outside the lines, your willingness to walk away. So thank you for also showing me the way, on this like in the wilds beyond the fences.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for saying that. All right. I'm going to hit
Cool.
pause.